Hi, Caroline. Thank you so much for joining us today. Could you let us know a little bit about why you wanted to touch on this topic of postvention?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a privilege to be here speaking about this today and to have the opportunity to spread the word a little bit because I think it's such an important topic to cover. So basically, it was about 6 or 7 years ago, I lost my husband to suicide, which came as a complete shock. It wasn't anything that I was expecting. He wasn't suffering from any mental health issues or challenges. And as far as I knew, there was nothing about him that made him not want to be here. So you can imagine the last few years have been quite a challenge to just accept what happened before even beginning to deal with the complex grief that comes with a loss like that. And on the subject of loss and grief, I've had several losses in my life for various different reasons, mainly by natural causes. I've heard loss by suicide described as grief with the volume turned up, which is a really good way to explain how different it is. It's the noise of all of these complex emotions that come with it. Um, so I talk all the time, and I'd love to talk to you a little bit today about the impact of a loss by suicide, how that differs to other types of loss, and the kind of unique support that is needed for people who are left behind. Um, and the other thing I want to talk about is the power of postvention. So when that support is put in place and it's there given effectively, the power that can have in relation to prevention.
Thank you for sharing your personal story there. I've had the opportunity to be able to chat with you at length about your story, and you've also written a book called Daddy Blackbird. I've started reading recently, and it's so powerful just from the start.
Oh,
Literally, you're just absolutely gripped. You're very open. You're very honest. You're very blunt as well. And I find that approach is so effective. But we'll chat a little bit about that a bit later. Could you just let us know what is postvention?
yeah, so it sounds like one of those complicated words that doesn't need to be overcomplicated. It's all about the support that's provided to people who have been bereaved by suicide and how that support is given, and the different ways that that can be done to make sure that those people who are in the depths of grief and all of the complexities that go with it, mainly caused by things like the different emotions, the stigma that surrounds all of this. So it stops people from reaching out for help when they may otherwise be comfortable doing that after another type of loss. So postvention is all about making sure that those people are given the support that they need, whether that's individuals or communities. That could be in the workplace, or it could be social communities, schools, those sorts of things. So it's all about that support that's given. I think in addition to that, it's important to acknowledge that when somebody has been bereaved by suicide, they're at a greater risk themselves of taking their own life if they aren't given the right support and they aren't receiving that at the right time. I think the statistics suggest we're 65% more likely to take our own lives as a result of this grief that we've experienced in this unique way. So that highlights the real critical need for a specific type of care to be put in place. And that's what postvention is all about.
One of the areas that I've always found very, very difficult is how to approach someone properly when they've experienced loss. Now, what would you say is the right response or the most helpful response to someone who has experienced a loved one who has taken their life?
I think it depends who you are and the type of relationship you have with that person. In my experience, the majority of people choose to say nothing at all. And that is the worst thing to do because that is so isolating, and we feel like we've done something wrong, or people no longer want to approach us, or we're not we're not kind of members of society anymore as we once were. Our whole identities have changed. So I think it's a case of just remaining natural. It may not feel like a very comfortable situation to be put in, and people will often want to say something like, how are you doing, which feels like a huge question to ask somebody that's just been bereaved by suicide. Narrowing that question down can sometimes make it feel more comfortable. So if you want to ask somebody, how has your morning been? How are you doing in terms of supporting the children? Are you eating all right? Is there anything practical I can help with? I'm a really practical girl at heart, and I needed practical care and support from friends, family, colleagues, those sorts of things. So I think the advice I would give is to make sure that you say something rather than nothing. Try not to be afraid of saying the wrong thing. It's really quite hard to say the wrong thing. If you feel that you are, you can be honest about that and say, I really don't know what to say. I just want you to know that I'm here. I want to help. Contact me. Let me know if there's something I can do, whatever that might be. But yeah, say something rather than nothing.
I suppose that leads into where we kind of want to go with postvention, is that sometimes people just don't know what to say. And as a result, will step away from it and go, yeah, that's not for me, or it seems like too difficult and I am too scared for the potential that I may say the wrong thing and actually upset the other person a lot more.
Yeah.
How can someone open up communication with someone? Say, for example, you didn't know that your husband harbored these thoughts.
Yeah.
And so how can we start conversations with people if we don't know that there may be an issue in the first place?
I think that's a really good question. And if we look at the workplace, for example, and the need for psychologically safe spaces to give people the opportunity to open up. So we don't need to know that somebody's struggling to be a kind, compassionate human being. So making these spaces, wherever you are, and communities, approachable places, being clear that if we do have challenges, whoever we are, this is a safe space to talk about them. And focusing on being human beings who are open to supporting people. There's a limit to what we can achieve, but that's a great place to start.
That's a really interesting point, and it's something that we advocate for as well. You've mentioned obviously in your book about actually that toxic workplace was one of the contributing factors. How was it for you to get more of an understanding of what the problems were after he took his life?
So I don't know the full reason why Steve took his life. And generally, there's more than one reason. It's a complex web of reasons that we may never fully understand. I know that he had challenges at work, and I know that he spent quite a long time in an environment that was really toxic, where some of the leaders there were even cruel. They would shout at the people who Steve worked with and him. They would throw stuff at them, shout and swear at them, even spit at them. It was a horrendous place. And I did encourage Steve to speak to the agency that employed him to get him moved to a different account. But his initial reaction was, as you can imagine, people don't want to rock the boat. They don't want to cause problems. They don't want to be seen as the one that's an issue. So he kind of wanted to just get his head down and get on with it. And that was one of the biggest challenges for me. I wish I'd been more insistent earlier on. Ultimately, I don't know how much that experience impacted the decision that he made in the end. And so there's a lot of guilt that comes with the loss by suicide. And I've tried not to overthink things that I can't have an impact on now, in order to make sure that I don't get swallowed up by that sense of guilt. And that is one of them.
One of the areas of postvention is the immediate response.
Yeah.
How can someone navigate that properly and respectfully?
So there's various ways. I think we need to give people the space that they need. I think we need to make sure that we're signposting them to the right support that's available out there. There's a lot of charities and organisations that can support people in those very immediate times. For example, SOBS is a charity that's fantastic. It stands for Survivors of Bereavement by Suicide, and they give support to people who have been bereaved in this way. There's no time limit on that. It could be from day one up to 20 years ago. I'm a volunteer on their helpline, and I speak to people every week who have been bereaved, whether that's somebody calling to say my friend took their own life yesterday, or whether that's somebody who's 10 years down the line, who's still struggling with some of the different complexities that families face after that. So it's making sure people are aware of support that's available and signposting them to the right places. And again, being a compassionate human being, letting them know that you're available to talk. Don't stand back too much and say, I'm here when you need me, you know where I am, because often that can feel quite standoffish, and that's one of my bugbears too. So there's a balance. Sending a message and saying, I don't expect you to reply to this because I know that there's a lot going on, but I'm thinking of you, is so powerful too. So those two things I think are really helpful to understand and be able to point people in that direction.
That sounds like a really lovely charity. I'd never heard of it. How did you get involved in that?
Yeah, I think there's so many charities that are hugely supportive, and it ends up being a bit of a postcode lottery as to who finds out about these services and who doesn't. So I'm really pleased to be able to talk about them whenever I'm able to. Another example was directly after we were told about Steve. So he was missing for a couple of days, and then the police came and told us that he'd been found. We were told about a charity called Winston's Wish, another incredible organisation who support children bereaved in all sorts of ways, including by suicide. And they gave us a huge amount of support in terms of how to tell my children, what sorts of things to say, what sorts of things to expect from them. So throughout this journey at different stages, I've been introduced through connections that I've made and through the work that I'm doing to all sorts of different organizations and charities. I'm still discovering what else is out there, which is great. But the more we can talk about them, the more people know about them, and the more people are able to then use them and benefit from these fantastic services that they offer. I list a lot of them in my book, and I talk about the different experiences of how I've interacted with each one and the support that I've had from each one, and how I think other people can benefit in that kind of first year and beyond. There's so much support that you can find. You just need to know about it. So every opportunity I get, I talk about them.
I think what would be really lovely is if we could actually have that list, and we'll put it on the blurb for this podcast episode, and we'll put it out on our socials as well. One of the areas of Postvention is also monitoring and following up. Now, I find with any major situation that happens in our lives, you'll always have the people around you, which is great, and I'm not putting it down, that will be like fully in contact for the first 2 weeks. Then after that, it starts to slow down and dissipate. But that's generally when you need it the most, isn't it? What's your experiences of how people have like kept in contact with you?
It's a great point that you're making, and it's so relevant to this particular topic. So Steve died in November 2018, but it was mid-November. We then had the funeral in the middle of December, and I remember it being right in the time where people were going off to Christmas parties and doing their shopping and having their turkey dinners. And like you say, for the first few weeks, people were keeping in touch, contacting every day, to the point where you think, I need a bit of peace and quiet now. But then Christmas came along and it just seemed to stop all contact. I had several people that stuck with it and still do. But unfortunately, lots of friends and family went off distracted by Christmas and never came back. And that's a really painful part of the process that I know so many people go through. Then you have those kind of same issues with the workplace, for example. So after compassionate leave. I took a few weeks and then I went back to work. I was part-time. I had a huge amount of support from my colleagues, who many of them lived locally. They would come and bring presents for the girls or take them out on a dog walk to give them a distraction and give me a break. I was able to sit at my desk and cry if I needed to, and nobody would give me a dodgy look or kind of feel uncomfortable. Then COVID came along, which was completely a nightmare for everybody, obviously, but in the middle of grieving, to be thrown into that isolation was just the worst possible timing. So we were all working from home. The contact with work kind of went right down. We were all doing just what we needed to do to keep the company running. But that was the kind of start of things becoming less and less supportive, to the point where I was evolving and my grief was evolving, but work weren't keeping in touch and keeping up to date with that. So that sense of psychological safety that I felt early on was completely gone, and I didn't feel safe talking about how I was feeling and some of the challenges and anniversaries that I was experiencing, and that was impacting my mental health massively. So my advice to communities, organizations, whoever that might be, is that this is a long-term thing. Once we've lost somebody in this way, our identities, as I said earlier, completely change. We don't go back to how we once were. Things change and continue evolving. My journey with navigating my children through their grief has been evolving too. New challenges come up all the time. So keeping in touch with people, checking in with them regularly is so important. And when I say regularly, I don't mean kind of contacting them every day, but making sure, for example, if you're a line manager, checking in once a month, making sure you know what's going on with that person and what's changing, what support they might need, and being reliable, being consistent, letting that person know that you're not going away and you're going to be there if they need to get in touch with you too. So it's not a case of constant contact, but it's the regularity that needs to go on long term that's important, and that people need to understand.
There's something that we provide as advice a lot, is to check in, not check up. And it's basically making sure that we, as leaders, as a manager of an organization, that sometimes just doing that kind of checking in on them and seeing how you're doing. I don't want to know anything about your work or anything like that. I just want to know how you're doing. Actually, can produce so much more positivity for your organization in the long run.
100%. And it's a completely different tone to the idea of checking up, isn't it? You know the difference yourself when somebody comes to you and wants to ask you the questions that make you feel like you're being checked on. Am I doing the right number of hours and all those sorts of things, to when a human being is genuinely checking on your welfare.
I'd like to ask you a few personal questions, and it's about your emotions and your personal response when your husband took his life.
Yeah.
What kind of emotions did you go through in the first few weeks, months afterwards?
So it was a vast range of emotions. I mean, the first of those is just that complete disbelief. You can't understand what you're being told. It doesn't make sense. There's obviously the fear. What am I going to do? I have no idea how I deal with this situation. The responsibility, the heavy responsibility of having children and needing to tell them and support them through their grief. The confusion is just overwhelming. The loneliness, the person you want to share that grief with is the person that's died, and they're the person responsible for that death as well. It's just also overwhelming. And I kind of helped myself to understand this. I had this vision in my head of these children in a playground all barging into each other and trying to get to the front of the queue, and each of those children were one of these different emotions. So I picture the kind of little kid that's shame over there, and the other kid over here who's loneliness, and the one over here who's the complete overwhelm and the fear. But the one for me that was the main kind of playground bully, as it were, was anger. And that was the one that was always at the front of the queue, always bullying the other little kids that were all the other different emotions. And even when Hope came along, the new kid, that would get bullied by anger too. So I've carried that anger with me for so many years, and that's been the overriding emotion for me, despite the fact that I don't want that anger. I never asked for that anger. I'm angry at the situation. I'm angry at Steve for not telling me. I'm angry at whatever the issue was that caused him to do what he did. And that anger I struggled to manage in the early days. I was diagnosed with PTSD, and a lot of the therapy I had for that helped to bring it down from a 10 every day down to a more manageable number, maybe a 5 or a 6. And I've been gradually working on keeping that down. I had a t-shirt earlier, actually. I had a t-shirt on that said current mood is angry, which just lets people know that it's still there. It never goes away. I thought I'd better get changed for this one. But yeah, anger is the overriding emotion that I've had to deal with, and it kind of impacts every part of your life. So that's the main thing that I've had to try and manage through all sorts of different things that I've done, different therapies, going to a gym and kind of boxing it out in the gym, reading, looking at different ways to manage challenging emotions. I've read hundreds of books since Steve died and before, so I've used a lot of the things that I've learned before that. But yeah, the emotions are wild, and it's a busy thing going on in your head every day, and it's that kind of those loud emotions caused by that amplified complex grief that comes with suicide.
So you've managed to kind of navigate your own emotions, but you've also got two girls who have also done incredibly well, including actually, there was a YouTube video you shared with me, which was about words, wasn't it, that one of your daughters wrote?
Yes.
Could you tell us a bit more about how that came about and actually a little bit about their journey as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So they were 9 and 2 when Steve died. So the whole journey of supporting them and even telling them has been completely different between the two of them, because explaining that a parent has died to a 2-year-old who has no concept of even death, let alone suicide or mental health or anything, to a 9-year-old who's much more aware, much more inquisitive, has been quite a contrast and an exhausting one. And it still is. They're now 16 and 9, and that journey has just continued. I mentioned Winston's Wish earlier, who supplied this amazing guide called Beyond the Rough Rock, which details the 5 different steps to telling and supporting a child bereaved by suicide. And that's been super helpful to kind of drip feed the right information at the right time. The biggest lesson I learned from that was when a child asks a question about this topic, it means that they're ready for the answer. So when my 9-year-old comes to me and said, "How did Daddy actually kill himself?" I knew I had to give her the answer to that. And that's not a day that I enjoy remembering. But when Evie, my older daughter, was around 11 and started senior school, it was quite a jump, as it often is from primary school. And she would hear kids making a joke out of mental health and suicide, and lots of inappropriate language that often wasn't done on purpose. People would say things like, "I'd rather kill myself than sit through another maths lesson like that." And she would be so impacted and upset by this sort of language. She'd come home in tears, and she got to the point where she couldn't even be in school. And she did what I do to try and help manage some of this, and that's writing things down. And she wrote a story about how it was making her feel. And that story got turned into this short animation that's only a couple of minutes long, all about her experience. It's called Words Matter, and it's all about the impact of this language and how people need to just be a bit more aware of the things that they are saying and the way that it can come across. One example of that I can give straight away is when we use the term committed suicide, which is one that can be really offensive to people who have died by suicide. I would never kind of come down hard on somebody that says it, because most people aren't aware of the impact. So it's more about educating gently, and helping people to understand. In the 60s, suicide was a crime. So the phrase committing suicide makes it sound like it's something that that person has done wrong, that they've broken the law, or they've done something that isn't accepted by society. When we've lost a loved one and it's not through any fault of their own, that can be really painful to hear people using that phrase. So that's one that we try and just cut down and try not to use. But yeah, the whole animation that Evie was involved in creating went on to be used in schools, in universities, in charities. It's used in onboarding materials for organizations and induction materials to talk about how we communicate in the workplace as well. So it's huge. And it was even picked up by Sky News, who have done a piece, and that'll be going out shortly. It may have already gone out by the time this is aired, but yeah, that's something I'm hugely proud of. And Evie won a National Mental Health Award for her work on this last year. And her sister is following in her footsteps and doing whatever she can at the age of 9 in her own little way to do the same. So we're quite a vocal family in this regard, which brings it all back to that kind of lessons we've learned through the support that we've had, and how we want to kind of pay some of that back and help other people, which is critical whenever we're able to.
I love that. And I love that all three of you are using your voice to benefit so many people. Talking about using your voice, and we mentioned it earlier, Daddy Blackbird.
Yes.
Let us know, how did it feel for you to write that book?
Uh, yeah, I mean, I use the word complex a lot, and it comes in here perfectly. Such complex emotions around writing that. I never intended to actually write a book. That wasn't where I started. I mentioned that the kind of therapeutic points around writing and journaling. And I would, when I was feeling particularly low, I would often just write what I was thinking and the experiences that I've had and the different kind of moments that we've faced, particularly in the first year or two. And I'd looked down at one point and realized I'd written about 20,000 words. And each of them, each of these kind of stages kind of formed a chapter. And people would say, "Oh, you should write a book." And I thought, well, I kind of have, almost. There was a bit more to do. But that's when I started to think, well, maybe I can turn this into something that's useful for other people. It was certainly useful for me. And I was intent on creating this kind of record of everything that's happened, because I've forgotten a lot of it and I don't want to forget all of it. I want it to be there for when I want to refer back to it, and for when my children do, and for other people. But as I started to get more serious about wanting it to be a book, the audience that I had in my head was people like me. So women, wives, mothers who had been bereaved by suicide of a certain age, because it's that kind of 40 to 50-year-old age group that is kind of highest risk. But it was about supporting people like me and helping them to feel less alone in their grief. And I've been told by so many people, so many of these women, that they're nodding away. I experienced this too. I thought I was the only one that went to an inquest and thought, why are they doing it in this way? Or I thought I was the only one that was experiencing these emotions. And it's just made me feel so much more reassured to know that I'm not alone. So that was amazing to know that I was helping people in that way. I then started to get messages from men who were contacting me for very different reasons. Often it was a private message because they didn't feel comfortable or safe speaking openly. And they would say things to me like, your kind of openness with this topic is really helping me to put myself in Steve's shoes. I can understand how he might have been feeling. I've had struggles myself. I can't talk about them openly, or I don't feel safe to. But you're encouraging me to perhaps see how necessary that is. I even then started having people saying things like, I'm not going to kill myself today because I've read the impact on you and your children. I can't do that to my wife and kids. And I know that I need to get some help. And to receive messages like that is incredibly humbling. And then to try and make sure that those people are getting the support that they need and signposting and encouraging them to reach out to the right places is kind of the next step. And that's why those communities and workplaces have their part to play too, because I can picture this kind of chap contacting me on his way to work. He's on the train, on the commute, he's feeling low, he reads my message and decides, I can't take my life today. And then he goes into work and he's faced with a team of people or a line manager that's having a tough day or is really busy for a particular reason and a bit dismissive. It's those moments where we don't know what thoughts that person is having. We don't know what troubles they're experiencing in their life. And it's that message around being kind, being compassionate, stopping for an extra moment to speak to somebody and just communicate on a human level. And that can make a difference beyond what we're even aware of.
You've got such an incredible heart to support other people and to make sure that they don't have to experience everything that you have. And I think that's such an incredible thing. And please continue to do that.
Thank you.
There's a reason why it is called Daddy Blackbird, but I believe that everyone should buy the book and it's within the first couple of chapters. So we'll leave that as a nice little surprise. But could you, before we finish, just provide us with 3 key takeaways from today?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first would be open communication, and that goes both ways. But if you're somebody that's struggling, it's hard for people to know. I didn't know what was going on in Steve's mind. And clearly I'd love to have had a better understanding of that. So if you are going through something, if you are struggling, reach out, talk to somebody, anybody. Doesn't have to be your partner, doesn't have to be your best mate, could be anybody. And that might be speaking to someone at work, it might be calling the Samaritans, but please find a way to start the conversation with somebody. The second thing would be, I mentioned earlier about that kind of support that we get in those early stages, whether that's the first few days, weeks, or even months, that then dwindles. And it's a key thing for me is to recognize that a loss, particularly a loss like this, has no expiry date. So continue providing that support and that openness on a permanent basis, because that loss doesn't end and that grief doesn't go away. Neither should that support that communities offer. And the third point is just to recognize that power in postvention. So when people are given the support that they need after a loss like this, there's so much good stuff that can come from that. There's so much education that can be shared with others. And there's so much support that can go into helping not just people that have been bereaved by suicide, but perhaps those that are struggling too, and making an impact on encouraging people to speak out. And that's where that kind of cycle just continues.
That's really helpful. Thank you so much. I really appreciated you talking about something that is extremely tough for you, but you are going to help so many people with your message.
You're welcome.
If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to hit the follow button so you don't miss another episode of Safeguarding Redefined.